Welcome to P1 lectures. Okay, so today when I'm looking on chapter 3, that is ABC costing, activity-based costing. Okay, so for you to have this great understanding on this topic, you need to have this great knowledge on the previous topic that are the traditional methods. Okay, that is absorption and marginal costing. So if you remember on those methods, the main focus was on direct costs, okay, or variable costs, whereby when you're kind of doing the production costing, gonna go there, say direct material was 5, whatever, direct labor was 7, variable overheads was 8, isn't it? Those variable costs, we're kind of taking too much care on them, isn't it? And then the other whatever fixed costs, if there were 10,000 in a period, you're gonna divide them by number of units, okay? Divide that by number of units and get your whatever your overhead per unit, isn't it? But we're not paying much focus on this figure, okay? If it was $10,000, how much are fixed overheads attributed to whatever invoice processing? How much of this is kind of attributed to whatever machine setups, right? We're just kind of arbitrarily sharing this cost to the product, isn't it? So we're kind of placing more focus on this one, isn't it? So these methods kind of have a bit of a great focus on this 10,000 of fixed costs, okay? So it's a bit of an alternative, mostly in this modern environment, where we're gonna see that direct costs are very few compared to the fixed costs, okay? So much focus need to be placed on that fixed costs, okay? That's why we have this method of ABC costing. So we have two things that need to kind of take note of this one on the ABC costing. We need to be able to understand the two things, which is cost pool and the cost driver. So these two things, they're very key, okay? You need to know the difference between the two. So a cost pool is an activity that consumes resources and for which overheads costs are identified, okay? For example, machine setup. So machine setup is a cost pool. It's a bit of a location where costs are kind of accumulated, okay? A cost driver, as the name say, is a unit of activity that consumes resources, okay? So for example, under machine setups, what drive the costs forward or upward? It's number of machine setup, isn't it? Someone will kind of go in, they drive the costs to be upward, okay? So this one is example of a cost pool and the cost driver. So cost pool is a bit of a location where costs are kind of being accumulated, okay? And then a cost driver is the activity driving the costs upward, okay? So make sure you have this great understanding on cost drivers and cost pool, because before we're gonna go further, if you have any problem, just pause the lecture, try to look and make sure that you understand this basic knowledge, okay? So when I'm choosing activities to run to use when I'm doing this activity-based costing, they must be relevant, okay? In other words, there should be a connection between the cost driver and the consumption of resources for the activity. So if you choose a cost pool and then choose a cost driver that is not related to the cost we are choosing, so basically all your information is going to be wrong, okay? So it must be relevant and must be easy to measure, okay? There mustn't be a lot of complication between this calculation, okay? It must always be kept clean and simple to read and understand, okay? So there's a bit of examples of activities in our textbook of what is a cost driver there. So it's like the cost of setting up a machinery for production run might be driven by the number of setup, okay? So for example, the overhead you are having here is machine setup, right? And then what is driving those costs upward? That is the cost driver. That is number of machine setups, isn't it? Get the point. Another one, the cost of running machines will be driven by the number of machine hours for which the machines are running, isn't it? So for example, you're kind of looking at the overhead, that is the cost of running a machine, and what is driving those costs forward? So basically, it's gonna be the machine hours, isn't it? Machine hours. Because basically, if the machines are off, then there won't be too much costs kind of running in there, isn't it? Very, very key. Another one, I think that one of our last one examples. The cost of assembling the product may be based on the number of direct labor hours, okay? So if you're kind of looking there on the cost of kind of assembling whatever product you're trying to assemble, and then what's driving the cost of assembling a car, whatever you're assembling, high, is a cost driver. What cost driver is that? If you're assembling using your labor, using your physical labor, then the cost driver is gonna be labor hours, okay? So make sure you have this great knowledge on the cost driver and the cost pool, okay? So we have three different drivers, okay? Three different cost drivers, okay? So these cost drivers, whatever the machine setup, whatever the labor hours are gonna be, there are only three types, okay? We have transaction drivers. Here in the textbook it says the cost of an activity is affected by the number of times a particular action is undertaken, okay? The example would be number of setups, number of power drills operation, number of purchase of material received, number of purchase orders, okay? So these ones, they are transactions because they are kind of affected by the repetition of that activity, okay? For example, we talk about the machine setup, isn't it? So this cost driver is going to kind of increase based on the number of based on the number of setups, okay? Based on the number of machine setups, isn't it? Number of machine setups there, okay? That's very, very key, if you understand what I mean. And another one can be whatever the number of batch, the number of material received, okay? So that one also can be an indirect cost, okay? Can be whatever storage, okay? Can be whatever storage, okay? And then they're gonna be material getting stored, isn't it? So in there, they're gonna also be whatever a cost driver driving those storage costs upward, okay? Can be whatever, how many bags arrive in each and every month, okay? Of whatever raw material. And then number of purchase orders, okay? So these ones can maybe you're kind of looking on the invoice processing. Invoice processing, right? Invoice processing. So what is driving this costs forward? What is driving costs forward? So it's going to be number of purchase orders, okay? Because basically you're going to be having more purchases, then you're going to be having a lot of invoice there to write, right? Driving this costs forward, okay? So those ones are called transaction drivers, okay? And then the next one is duration drivers, okay? So the next one is duration drivers. So the first one just did is called a transaction driver, okay? Transaction drivers. And then that's the first one. The second one here that I'm gonna do is duration drivers, okay? Duration drivers. Duration drivers, okay? So that one, the cost of the activity is not much affected by the number of times the action is undertaken, but is affected by the length of time that is taken to perform an action, okay? Can be the setup costs, may not be related to the number of setup, but can be related to the time taken to make a setup, okay? So sometimes, so remember saying that there must be a good correlation between the cost pool and the cost driver, okay? So if the cost pool is the machine setup, okay? So it's gonna be driven by the number of setups or the length of time you are taking to set up a machine, okay? So the duration drivers are driven by time taken to complete a certain activity, okay? That's very, very key. One of the last one is the third one, okay? The third one, which is intensity. Intensity drivers, okay? Intensity drivers. All right. So on this one, okay, as you know, some of the orders or some of the activities, they may require maybe more labor or more time than other activities. Okay, you look at the textbook, they give an example there. For example, you are a local a local producer, a local manufacturer, and you're selling your goods both to domestic and international customers. Okay, so the domestic orders may need lesser time and lesser packaging, and then the overseas orders they may need more time and more packaging. So that is intensity driver, whereby you're kind of looking at some of the activities, you are spending more time and more work, isn't it? So they may need to be charged with more costs, isn't it? More costs. The overseas, okay, the overseas orders, isn't it? The overseas orders will need more cost allocated in them rather than the local orders. Okay, so intensity, that's what you're talking about in there. Okay, so I want you to pause and try to repeat and make sure that you understand what is a cost driver. Okay, that's very, very key. And what is a cost pool? So we are moving on from that point. Okay, we'll now move on to the next stage on how to calculate a full product cost using the activity-based costing. So if you have a good understanding on the previous one we said before, absorption and marginal, then this one mustn't be that difficult. Okay, excellent. This one mustn't be that tricky. So step number 1 in the textbook says group production overheads into activities according to how the costs are driven. Okay, so number 1, group them, for example, cost pools, isn't it? And then second, identify the cost drivers. What is causing the costs to increase, right? Step number 3, calculate the cost driver rate for each activity. So this is more like overhead absorption rate. Okay. Number 4, absorb the activity cost into product. Okay, that one must be easy from the previous topic of absorption costing. Calculate the full product cost and or the profit or loss. Okay, so this one will be deducting from the price. So these are the great steps that you can follow when you are calculating the full cost price of a product, right? So we have an illustration in our book sitting in there, okay, that I want us to look in our next lecture. Okay, so at the moment I want you to have a great knowledge of cost drivers and cost pools. So see in the next lecture I'm going to do an example of costing using the ABC. Thank you.